Hello and welcome to episode 7 of this Blender and Unity crash course. This episode is going to be on introduction and navigation in Unity. Also, I just wanted to quickly mention that we're not finished with Blender, not even close. There are some things that we need to understand before we go ahead and create an interactable object, because obviously an interactable object in a game world is much more than just a 3D model. There's some programming involved. Coding is going to take a long time to explain. On top of that, there could be some physics or animation, depending on what we want to do. So I promise we will get to that. We're going to go the whole 9 yards. We're actually going to do post-processing and a simple saving method called player prefs in Unity. Left to do in Blender, we do have to create a character. We have to create a little collectible coin. We're going to create an icon for that coin, and we're going to animate the character to do, I guess, walk around, maybe jump, and do a little attack so he can smash the cube. But we will create the smashed cube at another time. So just bear with me. We're going to get to everything, I do promise. Okay. So when you open Unity, you have an empty scene here, almost empty. You will get a main camera and a directional light in a new project. This is your hierarchy right here, similar to Blender, only it's on the left side. You can move these to wherever you want. Just click this little tab here, and you can dock this anywhere you want. So you get a main camera and a directional light. Over here on the right side, you can see your inspector. So if you have a game object selected in your world, you can edit the components and the preferences here, transform and such. Likewise, these are your asset folders. So dropping this arrow down, we can see all our folders. So right now we just have scenes and this sample scene, which is what we're in right now. If we double click this, it'll just reload the whole thing. And with the scene asset, you want to edit it here in the hierarchy and here in the viewport. You're not going to get much to do in the inspector. So what we're going to do is right away, let's go into our assets and let's create some folders, because we're going to want a few different things here. So here you can drag in music, textures, models, animations, special effects, all kinds of stuff. So we're going to make some separate folders for that stuff. So let's start with textures. Let's make one for materials. Let's make one for models. We will be importing our cube very soon, our crate. Okay, and I think that's good for now. So we can fill these up with whatever we want, and then we can drag things from them into our scene. And this here is basically your level. You can make multiple levels. Usually you have one for your main menu, one for your game world, one for your credits. Maybe you have multiple levels for your game that are all different. You can have 100 scenes if you need. So in your scene view, you have game view, right? And what this is going to show is exactly what your main camera is looking at, or whatever your active camera is. You can have multiple cameras doing different things as well. Our scene view will show a little preview of our main camera as well, so we don't have to go right into the game view to see exactly what it's looking at. If we just want to check quick, it's right here. So some quick camera controls. They're a little bit different in Blender, which might confuse you, but it's okay. Just get used to, you know, the fact that these are two very different programs. Just bear that in mind. You do have a viewport in both, and they're controlled a little bit differently. So the camera in Unity, you can right click, and what this is going to do is it's not going to rotate around any sort of pivot besides where the viewport camera is. So you can kind of look around like this by holding the right mouse button down. You can't really rotate around something like you do in Blender. Another thing, you can hold down the middle mouse button. You can pan your scene around. Right, just click and drag, you see the little hand pop up. Universal tool, you can do the same thing as in Blender, zoom in and out by scrolling the wheel. And that's pretty much it. That's all you really need for the camera, the viewport camera. To move objects, you just click on something, and this transform here will change as you drag arrows around. Now here are your transform options here. I usually use this one. I love it because you can rotate, you can drag, move, you can use these little tabs here, which are great. They just move on 2 axes. You can scale, so these little blocks are for scale. Right? Okay, so likewise we have generic objects that we can just load up into Unity. So we have cubes, spheres, stuff like that. So we can right click in our hierarchy, in our scene, come down to 3D object, and we can create a cube. So what this cube is going to be now is it's going to be the floor of our world. So what I want to do is have this at 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So you can right click this transform and click reset. And that'll just set it right back to the center of the world. Now I want to scale it, so I want to take this tab here, shrink it there, and you can also just type in here. So I think it'd be easier just to say 0.05, right? We'll go 20 by 20. And this is just a floor for our player to walk around on. You can see that it gives you a few components right off the bat as a mesh. You have a mesh filter, which is basically taking in mesh information and drawing it for you. You have a mesh renderer, which basically takes in all the information for that mesh that you want to change. Like you can change whether or not it casts shadows, whether or not it receives shadows. You can change its material. So why don't we go ahead and create a material. I'll explain the box collider a little bit later. So let's go into our materials tab. And you can right click and create assets in here as well. Assets to be used in your scene. So you can right click, you can create, and there's new stuff here. So we're just going to come down to material. This is a generic material for a mesh. Okay, we're going to name this floor default. You can name it whatever you like. That's what I'm going to call it. So first we can just drag this right onto that so we can see what our changes are. Right now here you have different maps that we downloaded from textures.com we can use. We got the albedo, normal map, and the ambient occlusion is right here. Now all these are great metallic height maps. The secondary maps here are awesome too. You can add more bump, like a secondary bump, and you can add extra detail as well, sort of like decals, if you will. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the color of this. So just click this little tab here. You can also use this little eyedropper and just click somewhere. Right, it's going to tell you what color you want. You can actually click anything, which is pretty cool. You can click the yellow or the green y-axis, and it'll change it to the color of that y-axis. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it, I guess, sort of a brown, so it looks like maybe dirt and gravel, something like that. Sure. All right. We'll take the smoothness down, make it rough. Okay. Okay, so that's good. So that's how we'll create our material for our crate as well once we drag in the textures. Next thing to explain is this box collider. So the analogy I want to give you is ghosts, spooky ghosts. So they can move through walls, right? People can't, objects can't, nothing can. Doesn't make any sense. So with colliders, basically is you're saying that this object is not a ghost. I'll be able to demonstrate something in a second once we import our crate, but just bear that in mind. So if something does not have a collider, things are going to move right through it. Even when you drag them into your scene, it's not going to land on the floor or anything like that. It's just going to be gone because it's going to want to go wherever the hell your cursor is, as if there's no wall here. So I hope that makes sense. That being said, let's go ahead and bring in our model now. So you go to your folder where you exported that FBX file. Just click and drag it into your models folder. You can go right here, or just if you have it open, just drop it into the open port here. Okay, and there's our crate asset. Now we need to drag in a couple more things, so we need our textures. Let's go to our textures folder, drag in all of these. Now right away, as I said before, this normal map, bump map, is not a color texture. Right, this one is. This is going to tell it where to put the darker shadows, but this one is just for bump. It's for geometry information. So Unity in the same way is going to ask if it's a normal map or not. Now the information from our material in Blender has transferred onto our model here, but it's white right now because it's looking for the textures and they're not here. So if we drag them in, it will actually recognize them and create a default material for that cube, and it's going to ask us if we want to fix the normal map. Now I'm going to say ignore, but usually you want to say fix now. I'm going to say ignore because I want to do it manually to show you guys. So if you ever bring in a normal map and it never asks you that question, and usually won't unless you have information set up from somewhere else. So if you just bring in a normal map to use somewhere, click it right here. You want to go down to texture type and say normal map right there. Boom. You click apply, and now that will work the way it's supposed to. See a preview here. Drag this up and see a little bit better, right? Great, so that'll work now. So let's drag in our model. So now the information has been transferred, but we cannot manipulate this material right here. We can't change anything about it. We need to create our own again. Okay, so dragging in this model, now what I mentioned about the collider, see it's going to plop itself right onto this as if it's a wall or a floor, right? Now I'm just going to delete this so I can demonstrate. If this didn't have the box collider, we can just deactivate a component by checking this little arrow here. Same with deactivating an entire object. We'll deactivate all of these components as well because they have nothing to work on, right? The cube is deactivated, but we can also deactivate individual components, leaving the cube active. So if we deactivate the box collider and we drag this in, it's not going to know that there's a, see that? It's not going to know that there's a floor there, and it's saying, where do you want me to go? So colliders will help with that as well. Will help with building your scene because things will drop down right onto their origin, their point of origin, right? Which in Blender we created down here. Now you have a few hotkeys here that you can use to manipulate this object. Before I continue, you can hit Z, and that will change it to its pivot point or the it will change it from its origin to the median point, to its center of mass. So hitting Z back and forth, see what happens there. That's our origin, that's our center of mass. You can hit X as well. So say I rotated this, X will change it from its own X, Z, and Y axis. Now another thing to note is in Unity, the Y axis is up. In Blender it's the Z axis, but in Unity the Z axis is the forward direction of a game object. So its front is this. Right, so the Y axis is up in Unity. If you press X, it'll change it to the world's X, Y, and Z. So hitting X back and forth will change it from the object's X, Y, and Z itself to the world's X, Y, and Z. That's just in case you've rotated stuff, because usually we have everything at 0, 0, 0, importing it from Blender. So let's go to materials, and let's create a material that we can actually manipulate. We can change the smoothness, how strong the bump is, stuff like that. So let's go down one more material. You could also just duplicate this. I'll actually tell you that right now. Let's delete this. Delete. Just right-click things to change aspects of them, but you can hit Control D. In Unity, Control D is duplicate. So we can duplicate in here, we can duplicate in the scene, right? We can duplicate up here, Control D, it's all the same button. So let's go to our material, let's Control D and duplicate this. So this is our secondary one now, so let's rename this. You can just like a folder, just click somewhere there and it'll give you the rename. We're gonna call this Wooden Crate. Okay, and this is using 1K textures, so you can put _1K at the end if you want, just so you're aware of that. Maybe you'll have another one that's less.